The clock on the kitchen wall showed 6:30 p.m. when Rosa finished wiping down the last table in the main dining room. Her feet ached from running around all day, but she couldn't rest yet. Tonight was the biggest event of the year at Grandview Country Club, and she needed every dollar from the overtime pay. Rosa had been working at this fancy place for 3 years now. She knew every corner of the building, every rich person's favorite drink, and exactly how to smile politely when they treated her like she was invisible. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and steady was what her family needed right now. Her mom had been sick for over a year. The medical bills kept piling up, and her little brother Tony was only 15. Someone had to keep food on the table and the lights on. That someone was Rosa, even though she was only 24 herself. Tonight felt different, though. The whole club was buzzing with excitement. Rich people in expensive clothes were arriving in shiny cars. Women wore diamonds that probably cost more than Rosa made in 5 years. Men adjusted their fancy bow ties and talked loudly about business deals and vacation homes. This wasn't just any party. It was the annual charity gala, where all the important people in town came to donate money and feel good about themselves. The mayor would be there. So would the richest families, the biggest business owners, and anyone who thought they were somebody in this city. Rosa straightened her black vest and white shirt, the uniform all the servers had to wear. She checked her reflection in the mirror by the kitchen door. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, just like the manager wanted. She looked professional, invisible, exactly how they preferred their help to be. The main ballroom looked incredible tonight. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting sparkles of light everywhere. Round tables covered in white cloth filled the room, each one set with more forks and spoons than one person could ever need. Fresh flowers decorated every surface, and their sweet smell mixed with expensive perfume from the arriving guests. But the centerpiece of the whole room was the grand piano, sitting on the small stage at the front. It was a beautiful black Steinway, polished until it gleamed like a mirror. Rosa had walked past that piano hundreds of times over the years, but tonight it seemed to call to her somehow. She remembered the first time she saw it 3 years ago, when she started working here. She had stopped for just a moment to admire it, running her fingers gently across the smooth wood. The manager caught her and gave her a sharp warning about touching things that didn't belong to her. She never touched it again, but she looked at it every day. "Rosa, table 12 needs more wine," called Janet, the head server. Rosa snapped out of her thoughts and hurried over with a fresh bottle. The guests at table 12 didn't even look up when she poured. They were too busy talking about their upcoming trip to Europe. As the evening went on, more and more people filled the ballroom. Rosa recognized some faces from the local newspaper, the city council members, the hospital board chairman, the woman who owned half the shopping centers in town. They all looked so comfortable in this world of wealth and power. Rosa moved between tables like a ghost, refilling glasses and clearing plates. She had perfected the art of being helpful but invisible. These people wanted good service, but they didn't want to actually see the person providing it. She was just part of the background, like the flowers or the fancy wallpaper. Around 8 o'clock, something started to go wrong. Rosa noticed the event coordinator, Mrs. Peterson, talking urgently on her phone near the stage. Her face looked worried, and she kept checking her watch. Other staff members started whispering among themselves. "What's happening?" Rosa asked David, another server who had worked there longer than anyone. "The piano player canceled," he whispered back. "Something about being sick. Mrs. Peterson is trying to find a replacement, but everyone good is already booked on a Saturday night." Rosa felt her heart skip a beat. No piano player? She looked at the beautiful Steinway sitting empty on the stage. All these people had paid hundreds of dollars per ticket, expecting a full evening of entertainment. Without music, the whole elegant atmosphere would fall flat. Mrs. Peterson's phone calls were getting more desperate. Rosa could hear her saying things like, "I don't care what it costs," and "there has to be someone available." But as the minutes ticked by, her face grew more and more pale. The guests were starting to notice too. People kept glancing at the empty stage and checking their expensive watches. Some were already complaining to their table companions about the lack of organization. Rosa heard one woman say loudly, For what we paid, you'd think they could manage to book reliable entertainment. Rosa's hands shook slightly as she poured water at another table. Her mind kept drifting to the piano. She knew she shouldn't even be thinking about it. It was crazy. She was just a waitress. These people would never accept someone like her performing for them. But the music was calling to her, just like it had every day for the past 3 years. Every time she walked past that piano, she remembered the feel of keys under her fingers, the joy of creating something beautiful from nothing but sound and emotion. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here was a room full of people who could afford the best of everything, but none of them could create the one thing they needed most tonight: music. And standing among them, invisible in her server's uniform, was someone who could give them exactly what they were missing. Rosa took a deep breath and tried to focus on her work. She had bills to pay and a family to support. Dreams were expensive, luxuries she couldn't afford. The piano would have to wait for someone else, someone who belonged in this world of privilege and power. But as she watched Mrs. Peterson's increasingly frantic attempts to save the evening, Rosa felt something stirring inside her chest. It was a feeling she had pushed down for 3 long years, the belief that music could transform any moment, any place, any gathering of people into something magical. Tonight, that beautiful piano was waiting for someone to bring it to life. And whether these people knew it or not, they were waiting too. Rosa remembered the first time her fingers touched piano keys. She was 6 years old, and her grandmother had taken her to the old community center downtown. There was an ancient upright piano in the corner, missing a few keys and terribly out of tune. But when her grandmother showed her how to press the keys and make sounds, Rosa felt like she had discovered magic. "Music lives in your heart, mija," her grandmother had whispered. "When you play, you share your heart with the world." Her parents worked 2 jobs each, but somehow they scraped together enough money for piano lessons. Rosa's teacher, Mrs. Chen, was a kind woman who charged less than she should have because she saw something special in the little girl with the bright eyes and careful fingers. For 12 years, Rosa lived and breathed music. She practiced every day after school, even when the apartment upstairs was too noisy or when the neighbor's TV was blasting through the thin walls. She learned Bach and Mozart, Chopin and Debussy. Her fingers grew strong and sure, her understanding of music deep and intuitive. When she was 17, everything changed. Her father had a heart attack at work. The medical bills came fast and hard like a storm that wouldn't end. The piano lessons stopped first. They couldn't afford luxuries anymore. Then her father died, and Rosa's dreams of music school died with him. She got her high school diploma and started working immediately. Her mother was grieving and couldn't handle full-time work anymore. Tony was just a kid who needed food and clothes and someone to help with homework. Rosa became the grown-up of the family at 18, putting away her sheet music and focusing on survival. Now, 6 years later, she stood in this ballroom full of people who had never worried about choosing between music lessons and groceries. The irony cut deep. These wealthy guests could afford private concerts anytime they wanted, but tonight they sat without music while Rosa, who would give anything for just one more lesson, served their drinks and stayed invisible. Mrs. Peterson's phone calls were getting more frantic. Rosa could hear pieces of conversations as she moved around the room. "What do you mean everyone's booked? And I don't care if he's amateur, can he play or not?" By 8:30, the situation was becoming embarrassing. Guests were checking their phones. Some were already asking for their coats. The whole carefully planned evening was falling apart because of one missing piece: music. Rosa was clearing glasses from table 8 when she heard Mrs. Peterson say something that made her freeze. "There's literally no one else. We're going to have to make an announcement that there won't be any musical entertainment tonight." The woman at table 8, wearing a necklace worth more than Rosa's yearly salary, turned to her husband. "Honestly, Richard, this is unacceptable. We donated $5,000 for this event and they can't even manage basic entertainment." Something hot and angry flashed through Rosa's chest. These people had so much, and they were complaining about one missing piano player. Meanwhile, Rosa walked past a beautiful instrument every day that no one even appreciated, let alone played. During her break, Rosa stepped outside to the small staff patio behind the kitchen. The night air was cool, and she could see the lights of the city spread out below. She thought about her grandmother, who had been gone for 5 years now. She thought about all the songs that lived in her fingers, all the music that had been silent since her father died. She thought about Tony, who was probably doing homework at the kitchen table right now, and her mother, who was likely watching old movies to distract herself from the pain in her joints. They needed her job. They needed the money from tonight's overtime pay. She couldn't do anything crazy that might get her fired. But as she stood there, Rosa heard the faint sound of conversation and clinking glasses drifting from the ballroom. All those people, all that wealth and power, brought low by the absence of something Rosa could provide, something she had been born to provide. Her hands weren't rough from years of washing dishes and carrying trays. She had been careful about that, using lotion every night, keeping her fingers flexible even though she hadn't played in years. Somewhere deep inside, she had never quite given up hope that someday, somehow, music would find its way back into her life. Rosa walked back inside and found Mrs. Peterson in the hallway, leaning against the wall with her phone pressed to her ear. The woman looked exhausted and defeated. "No, I understand you can't cancel another engagement," Mrs. Peterson was saying. "Yes, I know it's last minute. Thank you anyway." She hung up and rubbed her temples. Rosa stood there for a moment, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. This was crazy. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not real life. She was a waitress. These people would laugh at her, or worse, they'd be offended that she had the nerve to suggest such a thing. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Music lives in your heart, mija." "Mrs. Peterson?" Rosa's voice came out smaller than she intended. The event coordinator looked up, clearly frustrated. "What is it, Rosa? I'm dealing with a crisis here." "I know you need a piano player," Rosa said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I can play if you need someone." Mrs. Peterson stared at her for a long moment as if Rosa had just suggested she could perform brain surgery. "You play piano?" "I've been playing since I was 6, Rosa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I had training for 12 years. Classical mostly, but I know some popular pieces too." The older woman looked her up and down, taking in the server's uniform, the practical shoes, the careful way Rosa held herself that marked her as working class. Mrs. Peterson had been organizing events for wealthy people for 20 years. She knew the difference between their world and Rosa's world, and she knew those worlds didn't usually mix. "Rosa, this is a very sophisticated audience," Mrs. Peterson said carefully. "These people are used to professional-level entertainment. I appreciate the offer, but—" "I understand," Rosa said quickly, feeling her face burn with embarrassment. "I just thought, since you needed someone—" Mrs. Peterson's phone buzzed with another text. She looked at it and sighed heavily. Rosa turned to walk away, cursing herself for speaking up. She had risked her job for nothing. Now Mrs. Peterson would think she was presumptuous, maybe even fire her for overstepping her bounds. "Wait," Mrs. Peterson called out. Rosa turned back, afraid of what she might see in the woman's face. But Mrs. Peterson just looked tired and desperate. "Can you really play? Well enough that these people won't complain?" Rosa thought about all the hours she had spent practicing, all the recitals she had performed, all the music teachers who had told her she had real talent. "Yes," she said simply. "I can play." Mrs. Peterson checked her watch. It was almost 9 o'clock. The natives were getting restless in the ballroom and she was out of options. "One song," she said finally. "If you can play one song well enough to buy me time to figure something else out, I'll see what I can do about getting you a bonus for tonight." Rosa nodded, not trusting her voice. One song. She could do one song. Her fingers already knew which piece she would choose. Something beautiful but not too complicated. Something that would remind these people why they had come here tonight. Just... Mrs. Peterson paused, looking uncomfortable. "Try to make it look professional, okay? And if it doesn't go well, we'll just cut it short and move on to dinner." Rosa understood. She was being given a chance, but it was a small one, and there wouldn't be any forgiveness if she failed. That was okay. She had been preparing for this moment her whole life, even if she hadn't known it. As Mrs. Peterson walked back toward the ballroom to make an announcement, Rosa closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In a few minutes, she would walk onto that stage and sit at that beautiful piano. After 6 years of silence, her music would finally have a voice again. She just hoped she remembered how to use it. Rosa's hands were shaking as she stood behind the kitchen door, listening to Mrs. Peterson address the crowd. Through the small window, she could see the ballroom full of elegant people, all looking expectant and slightly impatient. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Peterson's voice carried across the room. We've had a small change to tonight's entertainment program. One of our own staff members will be performing for us this evening. Rosa heard the shift in the room's energy immediately. Voices murmured, chairs creaked as people turned to look at each other. She caught fragments of conversations. Staff member? And what kind of performance? And this is highly unusual. Some people sounded curious, others skeptical. A few laughed, though not in a mean way, more like they thought this might be an interesting novelty. Rosa tried to focus on breathing normally. Her chest felt tight and her palms were sweating. She thought about Tony, probably struggling with algebra homework right now. She thought about her mother, taking her evening, medications and watching the news. They were counting on her paycheck from tonight. If this went badly, if she embarrassed herself and got fired, what would happen to them? But then she thought about the music. For 6 years it had lived inside her with nowhere to go. Every day at work, she walked past that piano and felt a little piece of her heart break. Tonight, finally, she had a chance to let the music out. Rosa? Mrs. Peterson appeared beside her. Are you ready? Ready? Rosa had been ready since she was 6 years old, but she had also never been more terrified in her life. She nodded and followed Mrs. Peterson toward the ballroom. As they walked, she could hear the conversations getting louder. Word was spreading through the crowd that their entertainment for the evening was going to be a waitress. Some people sounded amused, others annoyed, a few genuinely curious. Rosa paused at the entrance to the ballroom. The scene before her was intimidating. Hundreds of people in expensive clothes, all turning to look at her. She was still wearing her server's uniform, black pants, white shirt, black vest. Her name tag was still pinned to her chest. She looked exactly like what she was, hired help who was stepping way outside her role. But the piano called to her. Even from across the room, she could see its sleek curves and polished surface. The bench was positioned perfectly, waiting for someone to sit down and bring the instrument to life. Rosa walked across the ballroom, her practical shoes quiet on the thick carpet. Conversations died down as people noticed her moving toward the stage. By the time she reached the piano, the room had fallen into an expectant hush. She sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly. The piano was even more beautiful up close. The keys were perfect, clean and bright, each one properly weighted. This wasn't like the old upright she had learned on, or the electronic keyboard she had practiced on in high school. This was a professional instrument, the kind she had dreamed of playing someday. Rosa placed her hands gently on the keys, feeling their smooth coolness under her fingers. For just a moment, she let herself remember what it felt like to make music. The connection between her heart and her hands, the way emotions could flow through her fingers and become sound. She had chosen Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was a piece she had learned when she was 16, one of the last pieces she had mastered before her father died and everything changed. It was beautiful but not flashy, emotional but not overwhelming, perfect for an audience that didn't know what to expect from her. Rosa took a deep breath and played the first note. The sound that came from the Steinway was pure and clear, ringing through the ballroom like a bell. Rosa felt a shiver run through her body. She had forgotten how good a really fine piano could sound, how responsive it could be to the smallest change in touch. The opening melody of the nocturne was gentle and questioning, like someone tentatively sharing a secret. Rosa's fingers found their way across the keys as if no time had passed at all. The muscle memory was still there, the understanding of how to shape a phrase, how to make the music breathe. Behind her, the ballroom had gone completely silent. No one was talking. No glasses were clinking. No phones were buzzing. Even the staff had stopped moving. The only sound in the entire room was Rosa's music. As the piece developed, Rosa felt herself relaxing into the performance. Her hands moved more confidently. Her interpretation became more personal. This wasn't just technical playing. This was Rosa telling her story through Chopin's notes. Every year of struggle, every sacrificed dream, every moment of beauty she had noticed, despite the hardship, it all flowed through her fingers. The nocturne built to its first climax, and Rosa let her emotions guide the dynamics. She played softly when the music called for tenderness, more boldly when it demanded strength. She wasn't just performing the notes, she was living them, sharing them, offering them as a gift to everyone in the room. Something magical was happening in the ballroom. Rosa could feel it even though she couldn't see the audience. The atmosphere had changed completely. What had started as skeptical curiosity had transformed into something deeper: attention, respect, maybe even wonder. The middle section of the nocturne was more complex, with delicate ornaments and subtle harmonic changes. Rosa's fingers danced across the keys, finding every nuance in the music. She thought about her grandmother, who had first shown her the magic of the piano. She thought about Mrs. Chen, her patient teacher who had believed in her talent. She thought about all the concerts she had dreamed of giving, all the audiences she had imagined moving with her music. Tonight, finally, she was doing exactly what she had been born to do. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, Rosa poured everything she had into the performance. This might be her only chance to share her music with the world. Tomorrow she would go back to being invisible, to serving drinks and clearing tables. But tonight, for these few minutes, she was exactly who she was meant to be. The final phrases of the nocturne were like a gentle goodbye, soft and peaceful and full of hope. Rosa played them with such tenderness that several people in the audience found themselves wiping away tears they didn't even realize had formed. When the last note faded into silence, Rosa sat perfectly still for a moment. She could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the residual vibrations from the piano strings. The music was finished, but its effect lingered in the air like perfume. Then the silence broke. The applause started slowly, one person clapping, then another, then more. But within seconds it had exploded into something thunderous. People weren't just clapping politely. They were standing, shouting, some even whistling their approval. Rosa turned on the bench to look at the audience, and what she saw took her breath away. Every person in the ballroom was on their feet. The sophisticated, wealthy people who had looked at her with skepticism just minutes before were now applauding with genuine enthusiasm. Some had tears in their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in amazement. Mrs. Peterson was standing near the stage, and she looked completely stunned. This had been her last-ditch effort to save a failing evening, and somehow Rosa had turned it into something extraordinary. The applause went on and on. Rosa felt tears prick her own eyes as she stood and took a small bow. For 6 years her music had been locked away, hidden, ignored. Tonight it had finally found its voice again, and the audience had listened. The applause seemed to go on forever. Rosa stood beside the piano, overwhelmed by the response. She had expected polite clapping at best, maybe even some uncomfortable silence. Instead, the entire ballroom was on its feet, giving her the kind of ovation usually reserved for world-famous performers. As the clapping finally began to die down, Rosa noticed something interesting happening in the audience. People weren't immediately sitting back down and returning to their conversations. Instead, they were staying on their feet, talking excitedly to each other, gesturing toward the piano. The energy in the room had completely transformed. At table 3, she saw an elderly woman wiping tears from her eyes while her husband patted her hand gently. The woman had been complaining earlier about the food being too cold, but now she looked moved in a way that had nothing to do with the dinner service. Near the back of the room, a teenage girl was tugging on her father's sleeve, saying something. urgent in his ear. The man, Rosa recognized him as the owner of the biggest car dealership in town, was nodding and looking toward the stage with new interest. Mrs. Peterson appeared beside the piano, her face flushed with excitement and relief. "Rosa, that was incredible. I had no idea you could play like that." "Thank you for giving me the chance," Rosa said quietly. She was still shaking a little from the adrenaline and emotion of the performance. Could you possibly play another piece?" Mrs. Peterson asked. "I mean, if you know anything else?" Rosa looked out at the audience. People were settling back into their seats, but there was an expectant energy in the room that hadn't been there before. They wanted more music. They wanted more of what she had just shared with them. "I know a few other pieces," Rosa said modestly. The truth was she knew dozens of pieces by heart. Years of practice had built up a repertoire that lived permanently in her fingers and her memory. "Please," Mrs. Peterson said. "This evening was supposed to have an hour of musical entertainment. If you're willing." Rosa nodded and sat back down at the piano. For her second piece, she chose something a little more upbeat, a waltz by Brahms that had always made her feel hopeful. As she began to play, she noticed that the atmosphere in the room was completely different now. People weren't just listening politely. They were truly engaged, leaning forward in their chairs, following every note. During a quiet passage in the waltz, Rosa heard someone near the front whisper, "Where has she been hiding?" "This is extraordinary," another voice replied. "She's been serving our drinks for 3 years and we never knew." The comment hit Rosa in an unexpected way. For 3 years, she had been invisible to these people. She had refilled their water, glasses, brought them appetizers, cleaned up their messes, and not one of them had seen her as anything more than part of the furniture. Tonight, finally, they were seeing her as a person, as someone with talent and dreams and something valuable to offer. As she moved into the more complex sections of the waltz, Rosa noticed a man in the front row taking notes on his phone. He was dressed more casually than the other guests, and something about the way he was listening, with professional attention, analyzing what he heard, made her think he might be involved in music somehow. At another table, a woman was recording the performance with her phone. Rosa wondered if she should be concerned about that, but Mrs. Peterson didn't seem worried, so she focused on her playing instead. The waltz called for some technically challenging passages, and Rosa let her fingers show off a little. After 6 years of not playing, she was amazed at how quickly everything was coming back to her. Her technique was still solid, her musical instincts still sharp. All those years of practice hadn't been wasted after all. When the waltz ended, the applause was even more enthusiastic than before. People were clearly won over now. Rosa heard someone shout, "Bravo!" from the back of the room, but the most meaningful moment came when she noticed a little girl, maybe 8 years old, standing near her parents' table. The child was staring at Rosa with wide, amazed eyes. When their gazes met, the little girl mouthed the words, "That was beautiful," and gave her a thumbs up. Rosa smiled and nodded back. She remembered being that age, hearing live piano music for the first time and feeling like magic was real. Maybe tonight she was creating that same feeling for someone else. After the applause died down, Rosa played one more piece, a gentle arrangement of Amazing Grace that her grandmother had taught her years ago. It wasn't classical music, but it was something everyone would recognize, something that would speak to hearts regardless of education or background. As the familiar melody filled the ballroom, Rosa saw something beautiful happening. People weren't just listening. They were connecting. She saw a wealthy businessman reach over and take his wife's hand. She noticed a woman at table 7 close her eyes and sway gently with the music. Even the servers who had been trying to work quietly in the background had stopped to listen. Music had always had this power, Rosa knew. It could reach past all the barriers people put up, barriers of class, education, age, background. For a few minutes, everyone in this room was feeling the same thing, sharing the same experience. When the last note of Amazing Grace faded away, The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the awkward quiet of an audience waiting for something to happen. It was the peaceful silence of people who had been given exactly what they needed, even if they hadn't known they needed it. The applause this time was warm and heartfelt, rather than thunderous. As people clapped, Rosa saw genuine smiles, nods of appreciation, even a few people wiping away tears. As she stood up from the piano, Rosa felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see the man who had been taking notes during her performance. "Excuse me," he said with a warm smile. "I'm David Kim from the Tribune. I write about music and arts for the paper. Could I possibly have a word with you?" Rosa blinked in surprise. "A newspaper reporter?" Yes, I suppose so." "That was remarkable playing," David continued. "I cover professional concerts regularly, and what you just did, well, it was as good as anything I've heard this year. Better than most, actually, because it had such genuine emotion behind it." Before Rosa could respond, other people were approaching. The teenager who had been talking to her father earlier came over with him in tow. "Miss Rosa?" the girl said. "I'm Lucy, and this is my dad. I've been taking piano lessons for 2 years, but I've never heard anyone play like that. My dad owns Peterson Music Store downtown, and he wanted to ask you something." Lucy's father stepped forward, looking slightly embarrassed but determined. "I've been looking for someone to give advanced lessons at my store, someone who can really inspire students. Would you be interested in talking about that sometime?" Rosa felt dizzy. A newspaper interview, teaching opportunities. An hour ago, she had been worried about getting fired. Now people were treating her like she was someone important, someone with something valuable to offer. More people were gathering around the piano now. Rosa heard fragments of conversations. "Do you give private lessons? And my daughter needs to hear playing like this, and are you performing anywhere else?" Mrs. Peterson appeared at Rosa's elbow, looking both pleased and protective. "Rosa, why don't you take a few minutes to catch your breath? People are very excited about your performance." As Rosa looked around at all the faces, interested, appreciative, respectful faces, she realized that everything had changed in the space of 30 minutes. These people weren't seeing a waitress anymore. They were seeing a musician, an artist, someone worth knowing. For the first time in 6 years, Rosa felt like herself again. Not just Rosa the provider, Rosa the responsible one, Rosa who sacrificed everything for her family. She was Rosa the pianist, Rosa who could move people with music, Rosa who had something special to share with the world. The evening was far from over, and Rosa had a feeling it was about to get even more interesting. Rosa barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the applause again, saw the faces of people who had been moved by her music. It felt like a dream, but the business cards in her purse proved it had really happened. David Kim from the Tribune had been serious about wanting to interview her. So had Lucy's father about piano lessons. A woman named Patricia Mills, who organized events for the symphony orchestra, had given Rosa her card and asked her to call. Even Mrs. Peterson had pulled her aside at the end of the evening to say that several guests had asked about hiring Rosa for private parties. When Rosa finally got up on Sunday morning, her phone was buzzing with notifications. David Kim had already published a short piece online about her performance titled, "Hidden Talent Shines at Charity Gala." The article was accompanied by a video that someone had recorded of her playing Amazing Grace. Rosa stared at her phone, in amazement. The video had already been shared dozens of times on social media. People were commenting things like, "This gave me chills," and "Why isn't she performing professionally?" and "I would pay to hear her play a full concert." Her mother appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking concerned. "Mija, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Mama, look at this," Rosa said, showing her the article and video. "This is from last night." Her mother read slowly, her eyes growing wider with each sentence. "Rosa, this says you're exceptionally talented, and that your performance was deeply moving. People are saying such wonderful things about you." Tony wandered in, looking for breakfast. When he saw the video, his mouth fell open. "Rosa, Is that really you? You're wearing your work uniform, but you're playing piano in front of all those fancy people. It just happened, Rosa said, still barely believing it herself. The regular piano player canceled, and I offered to fill in. You never told us you could play like that, her mother said softly. I knew you had lessons when you were young, but Rosa, that was beautiful. Rosa realized her family had never really heard her play seriously. By the time she got good enough to perform pieces like the Chopin Nocturne, money was too tight for them to afford their own piano. She had practiced at school and at Mrs. Chen's house, but never at home. I haven't played in 6 years, Rosa said. I wasn't sure I still could. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Hello, is this Rosa Santos? The voice was warm and professional. This is Patricia Mills from the City Symphony. We met briefly last night at the gala. Rosa's heart started racing again. Yes, hello, Mrs. Mills. I hope you don't mind me calling on a Sunday, but I couldn't stop thinking about your performance last night. I've been involved with classical music in this city for 20 years, and what you did was truly exceptional. I'd love to discuss some opportunities with you if you're interested. What kind of opportunities? Rosa asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Well, we have a young artist program that provides scholarships for talented musicians who want to continue their education. We also have outreach programs where we bring music to schools and community centers. Based on what I heard last night, I think you'd be perfect for both. Rosa felt tears prick her eyes. Education opportunities. A chance to share music with kids who might never otherwise hear it. I would be very interested in hearing more about that. Wonderful. Could you come to my office sometime this week? I'd love to introduce you to our program director and maybe have you play for a few other people. After Rosa hung up, she sat staring at her phone. Yesterday morning, her biggest worry was whether she'd earn enough in tips to help with her mother's medication. Now she was being invited to audition for the Symphony Orchestra's Young Artist program. Tony was looking at her with the expression she'd never seen before, pride mixed with amazement. Rosa, you're going to be famous. I don't know about famous, Rosa laughed. But maybe things are going to change a little. Over the next few days, Rosa's life became a whirlwind. The Tribune article was picked up by other local media outlets. A radio station interviewed her over the phone. The video of her performance had been shared hundreds of times and had thousands of views, but the real changes were more personal. Lucy's father, Mr. Peterson from the music store, offered her a part-time teaching position that paid more per hour than she made at the country club. 3 families contacted her directly about private lessons for their children. Most importantly, Patricia Mills kept her word. Rosa auditioned for the Symphony's Young Artist program on Wednesday evening, playing the same Chopin Nocturne that had started everything. The program director, a kind man named Robert Chen, no relation to her childhood teacher, was impressed enough to offer her a full scholarship to continue her musical education. The program is designed for working adults, he explained. Classes are in the evenings and on weekends. We'll help you develop your technique, expand your repertoire, and give you performance opportunities. After 2 years, many of our graduates go on to perform professionally or teach at the university level. Rosa walked out of that audition feeling like her life had been turned upside down in the best possible way. She could keep working at the country club for now, but she could also start building toward a future in music. The biggest surprise came on Friday. Mrs. Peterson called her into the office at work, and Rosa worried that maybe the attention from her performance had caused problems. Instead, Mrs. Peterson smiled and said, "Rosa, we've had more requests for you to perform at private events than I can keep track of. I'd like to offer you a new position, part-time event musician, part-time server. You'd play piano at our special events and help with service when we need extra hands. The pay would be significantly better, and you'd have a more flexible schedule," Rosa accepted immediately. It wasn't quite the same as being a full-time professional musician, but it was a step in that direction. More importantly, it meant she could pursue music again without sacrificing her family's financial security. 6 months later, Rosa gave her first solo recital in the same ballroom where everything had started. The tickets sold out in 2 days. Many of the people who had been there that first night came back, including the little girl who had given her a thumbs up. Lucy was there too, having become one of Rosa's most dedicated students. As Rosa walked onto the stage that evening, wearing a beautiful black dress instead of her server's uniform, she thought about how much had changed. She was still taking care of her family. Her mother's health was improving and Tony was doing well in school. But now she was also taking care of herself, nurturing the part of her that had been silent for too long. She sat down at the same Steinway grand piano and placed her hands on the familiar keys. In the audience, she could see faces that had become dear to her over the past months. Students, fellow musicians, new friends who valued her for her talent and her heart. David Kim from the Tribune was there too, ready to review what he had already predicted would be a triumphant return to the concert stage for one of our city's most inspiring musical talents. But the most important people in the audience were sitting in the front row. Her mother and Tony, dressed in their best clothes, looking proud and amazed that this was their Rosa up on stage. As she began to play the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1, Rosa remembered her grandmother's words. "Music lives in your heart, mija. When you play, you share your heart with the world." Tonight, and for all the nights to come, Rosa's heart was finally free to sing again. The waitress had stepped to the piano, played a single note, and changed everything. Not just for the elite audience who first heard her, but for herself, her family, and everyone whose life would be touched by her music in the years ahead. Music had always been her calling. It had just taken one moment of courage to answer.